Monday morning after Super Bowl.
Yeah. I guess it was a Super Bowl, you know? It was a good game, lots of
It
scoring.
was a good game up until about the 58-minute mark. And then
What happened at the 58-minute mark?
they called a pass
Oh.
interference or holding on a receiver or a
Although, by the way,
defensive back.
I don't know if you saw the end game on that. Like, both those players both said, yeah, that was a hold.
So it's not that. It's not that. It's that they let that type of play
Yeah.
out for 58 minutes, and then the game is on the line. It was like the ref's like, I don't want to stay here for overtime. And
Yeah. The ending was not great, but I guess unless you're a KC fan. I
it
don't
was a
know.
great game up to that point. I mean,
But it was a
good.
great game. Yeah. High scoring game. Well, you look, these were evenly matched teams. They look,
Mhm.
very similar on paper, et cetera. So,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot. Listen, I was a Patriots fan, dude. A lot of my games were like 17-10, you know, just like crappy nail biters. Like, this was at least a good game. I haven't seen a lot of good games in the Super Bowl. So this was one. Yeah, no
Yeah.
doubt about that.
It was fun to watch. Here we are, back on a
Yeah.
Monday.
Yeah.
No AI updates to report, I don't think. I don't know. Other than Google employees mad at Google because they flubbed their own thing, but whatever.
Yeah. I've been screwing around with DALL-E finally. I think it's pretty cool. I wish you could. It makes square images for some reason. I guess I don't know.
So the
why.
one I think you should try out next, which is the one that I really like,
Yeah,
is Midjourney. You have to use it through
I've never even
Discord.
heard of this.
But it is amazing, and you can change. It's a little buggy for the aspect
Mhm.
ratio because you can do it in 16:9. It's not 1920 by
I
1080, but it's at
I
least
literally
16.
said I've been asking it like, hey, make this image in this aspect, and it won't. It just doesn't do it.
So with Midjourney, you type imagine and whatever the
Mhm.
prompt is you want, and then you have to do two dashes. Then it's AR space 16:9,
And-
and it'll
Okay.
do it. It's cool.
Well-
Though. Like Midjourney is the best of them, I think, so far. At least the most useful and
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I'll look at that.
yeah.
But I it's impressive. I mean, oil painting in the style of, Frida Kahlo,
Mhm.
blah, blah, whatever. It's like, it comes up with some cool stuff. I used it actually for an image. The one about the opera's adding AI
Oh,
stuff
yeah, yeah,
to
yeah.
their sidebar, right? So I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but you can see it's sort of an opera
Yep.
type of thing. And it says web, the web browser is part of it, I just thought that was kind of a cool, I think that might be my use for it, right? That
It is.
this thing will, because that's one of the tricks, like online, if you're creating content, like, creating new unique images, it's kind of hard. Or finding unique images is hard. And,
Yeah, and then the massive unknown that we don't know about is the whole copyright side of it, which the courts will figure out here eventually because it's
yeah.
you're on the wrong podcast if you want to think we're going to dive into the nuances of copyright and IP
Oh,
protection.
I mean, look, we're content creators, right? I mean, we see the fear here,
Mhm. Oh,
or
yeah.
the problem. And listen, I'm already plagiarized enough. There are certain bloggers who have based an entire career out of trying to write like me.
Mhm.
Aside from that, that kind of thing, but just outright theft too, AI makes that really easy, and that's concerning for the future. And now we're going to rely on AI to tell us when things were made by AI,
Yeah.
which is hilarious.
Now, here is a much more valid and legitimate use. Actually, at Stardock, we've started to use it over on the game side, not so much on the software side, but we have just decades of our own internally generated artwork. And so there's services where you can feed all these images to it and then kick out something that's in that style. And
Oh, nice.
because
Nice.
it's our own artwork for specific games, it feels like that's a very good, valid use of it.
That's very nice. Yeah, that's a great idea.
So there are very legitimate use cases and very valid reasons, but there's also a lot of concern. I mean, we've talked about it before, just the page. Like,
Well,
actually, there was a thread on Twitter that was really
Yeah.
interesting where somebody asked a hypothetical question for something that isn't answered yet because it's about a feature coming to a game. And Bing's current one's like, I don't know the answer yet. And the joke is because somebody hasn't written it yet. And
yeah,
so
that's exactly right. Yeah.
and that's the problem.
Yeah. Huh. This is kind of one of those tangential things, but one of the big concerns I've had over the past several years is just kind of a lack of memory span or attention span. You know, this you can't pay attention to anything anymore. You know, I've been reading my whole life, and I find it very hard to read long form content now. And it's because I've been trained over the past 10, 20 years, I don't know, to enjoy ever smaller, shorter content. TikTok is the version of this for video, right?
Yeah.
And then I don't know. Well, it's weird to me, like that opera thing I mentioned earlier. One of the things that it does is it summarizes a web article. I'm sorry, this blog post that was regurgitated from a kid in some other continent is not short enough to consume. You have to have it regurgitated again. It's kind of sad, but that's just like, that's passive, right? We sit there like, couch potatoes and watch content at night and don't think, and that's one thing. But you and I, like I said, and others are content creators, and it's not work like digging a mine in Chile or whatever, but it's still work, and it requires you to use your brain and whatever. And these tools will make that activity lazier, a lot lazier. And if we as a society can't even get out of our own way to enjoy content, how are we going to do so for creating content, right? I mean, of course, these things are going to be embraced. And like you said, or you kind of said this, there's kind of a spectrum, and there's good uses like, it's all good uses, right? To me, because I don't make PowerPoint presentations a lot, the fact that PowerPoint might have these AI-based features that will help me get up to date, up and running rather, with something that looks nice and is professional and has good content or whatever, that's very helpful to me. But of course, if I'm a high school student who doesn't know how to read anymore, and I need to write a report on some book I've never read and I'm not going to, they can use AI to create some nonsense that is probably better than anything they would have written anyway. But that's the problem, because then this just becomes the accepted, I don't have to read this anymore. Like, what did you have when you were a kid? I had Cliff Notes, right?
I was about to say Cliff Notes are...
Right? If I didn't want to read Oliver Twist, I still had to read something, But now, no, not so much. So, write me an 1,100-word summary of Oliver Twist. Whatever. I don't know. I mean, listen, if you're a good cheater, you'll go in there and add your own little isms to it, and but let's face it, no one is, that's the lazy approach, is just to not even look at it and send it in, and kids are going to do this, and it's concerning. That's all. We'll see how it goes. I have concerns.
Yeah, I don't know. I think we're all doomed, and
all doomed. Everything in life is like, could they have, it's like the guy in Lethal Weapon. He's like, I'm 5 days away from retirement. You couldn't have waited on this thing. But the thing is, I'm like 10 years away from retirement, so I'm going to have to deal with this. And it's like, I'm not happy about this.
Yeah, we'll see when Bing opens the door and what it actually does for web search.
Yeah, but the more time goes, the dumber it gets. There's more and more stories of people who are like, this thing is insane. It's what, I don't know if you saw, GeekWire had a little thing about their, Todd Bishop had broken the news about something, and then asked it about that, and it kept regurgitating the wrong date by a year.
Fantastic.
And he said, why do you keep lying to me? And he says, I'm sorry, I'm just using information. He says, no, you're not, because the date is this, and you're telling me it's something else. And he went back and forth with it, and it's passive-aggressively polite, like Siri or one of the other assistants would be if you said something nasty to it, like, oh, go screw yourself or something. It's like, well, I'm not going to talk to you if you're going to be like that, that kind of thing. And
See,
it's
I think that highlights what I feel is the wrong thing that people are getting about this. So in that example of what you just mentioned, Google should be able to crush what Microsoft is doing, because that is not, in my opinion, really AI stuff. That is just doing a query of knowledge that shows up in a links and which one's the best.
That's, by the way, that is the best point that's been made so far in this podcast. That's absolutely correct. So I think I mentioned this the other day when this presentation happened, and I asked you, remember afterwards, like, did you finally watch this thing? Yusuf Mehdi said, look, it was the proprietary comment. He said it's based on these three things. And one of them was like just this next gen Chat GPT, OpenAI thing, which everyone's calling Chat GPT 4, but we don't know, and whatever. The middle one, though, I think, or one of the ones, was our Bing index and all the work we've been doing over the years. And that's where I was like,
Mm-hmm.
What on earth would make you think that was any good? You know, we've talked about the quality problems over at Bing a lot, only because this thing has come up. And normally we wouldn't discuss Bing in the slightest. Why would we? Because, like I said, anyone who's like most, I would say 99 point something percent of people, if they even said, okay, screw it, I'll just use this, would have looked at the results and been like, yeah, no, I'm not doing this. And then just gone back to Google, of course. And there's a lot of news stories out or opinion pieces now like, oh, Microsoft just beat Google, it's over. And it's like, give it a second, guys. Give it a second. Because you're right. You know, the quality of the data out is only going to be as good as the quality of the data in.
Correct.
And I think that is where Bing falls short. And that's the Achilles heel of this entire thing. If this Skynet monster is based on the collected intelligence that Bing has gotten over the past 15 years or whatever, it's doomed.
See, to me, the real value of what is happening is the search engine. I hate the search engine example primarily because, first off, we've been trained for how long has Google been around or whatever, Yahoo, on how to enter a search query. Some people suck at it, namely my parents, but that's what we've been trained. The better uses
now you want to speak naturally.
Right. The better uses, in my opinion, are things like in Excel. And it's like write a formula that takes all the data in column C, filters it by column F, and then sorts it greatest to least and adds color gradient descending. Like that is something that I think is actually the true value because then it's localized and actually done well, as opposed to like, hey, when did the Titanic ship across? Because that's just a search. We've already solved that problem. AI does nothing for that.
I brought this up before. At some point, you know, at one of the few times in history where Microsoft is like, all right, we're going to make another big push with Bing, you know, there were a couple of things they did that they just found were popular on Bing. Like they really leaned in hard on like celebrity photos and information. Like people were always looking for like, what are Harry and Meghan up to or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So they kind of focused on that for a little while. That got them nothing. The other big one was I think they called it the answer engine. And the idea was instead of like this list of blue links, you ask a question like you said, when did the Titanic sink? And they're like, it sank in whatever the year was. And like right at the top. And then, there are links under that. But it's just, you know, you came here for this thing. But you know, Google does that too. And and like you said, I don't know that constructing like a search query is like an unnatural act or anything like that, but it's succinct. We have been, in fact, this kind of ties into the whole attention span thing when you think about it. I don't think any of us think in these flourishy sentences anymore.
Right.
You know, we're used to communicating with emoticons and very short little staccato things, and that's how we interact with technology. And honestly, it's efficient to do that. I don't ever go to anything like this and think to myself, here's a giant sentence I can construct.
Mm-hmm.
That has become an unnatural way to communicate in a way, right? I mean, anywho, in fact, I've experienced this because I just mentioned I've been using DALL-E, and it's hard for me. It has these examples, and they're like the thing you just said. They're very specifically constructed. You know, show me an astronaut riding a mouse on the moon, oil painting or something like, and it's like okay, you know, like I don't really think like that. That's it's specific, but it's like weirdly specific.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, you're right. I guess that's my the long way of saying I agree with you 100%. I mean,
yeah,
and it is, I think it's a quality in, quality out problem, and I don't know. I don't know.
We'll see.
Yeah,
we'll see. I don't know.
We'll see, but I feel like I know what I'm going to see. That's I think Bing gets elevated by this. By the way,
Sure.
I want to be clear. And that's not hard. They don't really have much of a position, and I don't remember what the data source was for this, but like 1 percentage point of search traffic is worth, I don't know if it was $1 or $2 billion, but it's worth a lot of money. So when you think about a growing business like Microsoft Services business right now, even a couple of small percentage points of gain is huge for them. It's huge.
Well, if you want a fun take-home activity after this podcast, what I do recommend you do is, so if you remember when you signed up for the Bing stuff, they said jump up through the wait list if you download the Bing app on iOS and Google, Paul.
Yeah.
Go read those reviews.
Oh. Right.